My name is Craig Howe, and I'm the director of the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies. The mission of CAIRNS is to raise awareness of issues that are important to American Indians and Indian tribes. With the Takuwe, the massacre, we didn't want to start and end with killing. What preceded the massacre and then what's happened since that day of the massacre, December 29th, 1890.
A chasm exists for Lakotas between Christmas and New Year, between Christian and savage, between red and white, burned into our hearts, our minds, our memories, even if we weren't there. December 29th, 1890. Wounded Knee Creek, the earth stained red with the blood of our people. If you listen, you can hear the terrified cries of innocent babies, moccasin and boot alike, running, the staccato pop and crack of firearms, muffled thud of bodies falling to the ground, souls torn from bodies, only to be bound to earth, trapped in a memory as bitter as the December winds, forever burned into the collective unconscious of every Lakota since that day. Please celebrate your holidays, ring in your new year, but send a prayer, a song, a whisper for mothers, sisters, babies, brothers, and husbands lost. Heinous, tragic, everlasting.
Wow, yeah, that's such a powerful representation of this show. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm Andrew Reinertz with Art South Dakota. We have Jim Spears also with Art South Dakota, Dr. Craig Howe from CAIRNS, and the filmmaker Dalton Coffey. So thank you all so much for joining us for a little conversation about the filmed piece about Takuwe. Craig, I might start with you and just ask, about this film piece itself. What did you think when you saw it? I mean, there was a number of different ideas that you and Dalton had kind of been discussing, and so I'm just kind of curious what your reaction was after having Dalton being out at Wing Springs and getting stuck, which we'll talk about later too, I'm sure. But just it's kind of went back into the lab, so to speak, and then this representation comes out. So what did you kind of think of the piece when you saw it first?
It's amazing. It's evocative, and I think it does justice to the exhibit in a short 4 minutes or whatever the length it does through one poem reading through, and it's just really strong, really well done. I could not have imagined it myself, so it was completely new. Dalton had shared ideas of what he was going to do, and those were in my mind. And it builds on that. I can see that, but it's a vision of his that must have developed as he was working on it. So I really appreciate it. It's very well done.
Well, it seems like it was a very kind of collaborative process, and we'll talk more later about all of these kind of your theory about these shows and how they're very cross-disciplinary and collaborative in nature. But maybe I might then go to Dalton to just ask from your perspective, how did you approach this filming? It's obviously such a sensitive subject, a difficult subject. But I think it was really in particular powerful how it seemed like you had a focus of letting the voices in the show do the speaking. It wasn't a narration imposed on it. It wasn't you or someone, with a scripted voiceover saying this, then that, then this, so kind of how did you approach it from your side of the filming?
Well, I kind of approached it a few different times. It kept evolving, like a lot of things that I work on do during various stages of the process. But it just kept moving me in different directions, and I certainly couldn't imagine it with just a traditional voiceover or have done it in a traditional way of a video. Like here's the organization, here's what they do. Thanks for watching. It was much more than that. And when I came out to visit, I had done some research on CAIRNS because I didn't know a lot, but I had done some research. And, but I deliberately don't do a ton because my job is to come in and try to, discover this and represent this in a way that somebody doesn't know would watch this and go, oh, I didn't know that. So in a way, I like to keep some mystery there, if you will, and some knowledge to still be found. And when I got there and I saw what was going on and talked with Craig and everything was it just was so I realized I was unprepared, and I needed to rethink this whole idea, and I centered on the Takuwe exhibit. It moved me. Craig gave me all these different little pamphlets that had all the different shows and exhibits and stuff. And I centered on that one, but I wanted to move forward with his blessing on that, and I didn't want to just come in as a filmmaker and just say, oh, well, here's what I want to do. As you said, this is a sensitive subject, and at any point, Craig could have said, no, I don't want you to do that, and I would have graciously said okay, and moved on to something else. But I think letting the people, their voice speak, letting the artwork speak, it really, and in a lot of ways, it's the simplest video of the series because I'm just showing the artwork, but it tells the story. And I think, well, I can't not do that. What better way to do this? And so it just and we came back out and then filmed Craig. I wanted some context. I wanted him, to sort of be the image, if you will, the moving image, because the rest of it's all static pictures, of course, and then there's music, and then I went back and I scored music. The song is in the key of A, so I figured that it was in the key of A, and I went and scored some music to it. It just kept changing. It kept changing and kept changing, and I was very unsure about it. And it felt like it was too simple, or it felt like it wasn't enough. And I think I can what if myself to death on that one. But I think the first person that saw it was my wife, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And she was crying, and I thought, okay, I think maybe I'm onto something.
Yeah, the sound design was really effective. I think really evocative. Having was that wind? Was that something you had recorded, or was that a part of one of the pieces of music, Dalton?
No, that was something I had recorded and put in there.
Did you record that when you were out at Wing Springs, or was that something you
that was from
locally?
a collection? I know it's in the state. I know I recorded that somewhere in the state, but it wasn't on that particular. I have a big collection of things I've recorded over the years, and I was just digging through looking for something that would kind of cut through if you're looking on a phone or whitewood, so you got to listen for certain frequencies, not to get technical, but yeah.
I thought that was really powerful to have that wind to really really root you in the place. It felt like you were standing out there on those kind of the rolling plains, and and then how you worked in the sort of whispering voices increasing and increasing, and you know, kind of built to that crescendo really effectively.
Right. And that's everybody, all of the poems, they're all in there at the end. That's all the voices sort of coming together. I almost wanted it to feel like I didn't want it to reach a point where it was unbearable, you know, but I did want it to get to a point where it maybe a little uncomfortable and not quite tell what's, you know, and that's intentional. That's, you know, I'm trying to, you know, I don't want to hurt your ears, but I want to kind of overwhelm it a little bit. That was the idea.
You know, I as you talked about the emotion that your wife experienced during that piece, it got me thinking about your work, Dr. Howe, and the mission of CAIRNS to highlight important issues to American Indians and the Indian tribes, and how you consistently use art for that work in all mediums of art. But it's really, of course, we're being an arts organization and advocating for the way the arts reach us in no other way. I'm just curious of your thoughts as to, as you start to tell these stories, as you try to educate people on these issues, why you turn to the arts and how maybe the arts can tell the story unlike any other medium.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what arts can do, I believe. And I like to think of arts being really inclusive. So in some of, actually in this exhibit, we do have an architect in Takuwe as well. And so we have a lot of ideas of incorporating multiple disciplines of art into these exhibits and into our mission, which is to, you know, advance knowledge and understanding of American Indian communities and issues important to them. So this is where we settled on. We do have kind of the written documents. We produce those types of history books, but we wanted to try to reach these audiences in other ways that you don't have to open a book. And this is where art is so powerful. It can have, you don't have to open a book, you don't have to read, but you can see and feel and hear. And those are the sensors then that we're trying to tap into to teach, to get our messages across that we wish to convey.
So what was it like corralling all these artists? We work with artists every day, and sometimes you know, that's the organization is the hard part. That's a huge project to get all of those folks and from, I assume, many locations together for this one piece. It's very impressive. How did you do that?
Well, it's hard, and on the other hand, we have a track record, I think. And so, like for this exhibit, we had artists from New York to Tucson, to Arizona, and from British Columbia to, I don't know where we would say, somewhere, you know, at least South Dakota, right? It's two countries and multiple states, 46 artists, I think is what we ended up with. And it's all in 4 months. From when we start to contact artists to when the show opens, 4 months. So when we developed these, the first one, we just wanted to challenge everything. There's nothing we're not trying to reconceptualize. And so working with these artists is just amazing. And it was, you know, the first show we had 16, and I thought, wow. And I was told by, you know, curators that, oh, you're going to have all types of trouble. And we get these stereotypes come in, you know, Indians aren't going to produce, they're not going to be on time. I said, I think they will. I don't see any issue. And so we did it. It's all 16 artists completed their works amazingly on time. Amazingly meaning the arts are amazing. They did the work on time. And since then, we've just increased, you know, from 16 up to, we've done exhibits with nearly 60 artists now, still in that same time frame. So it's personal contact is one. And I think the other thing is they have to, again, this is my perspective, but they have to know that we, CAIRNS, are just as invested in it as they are. And we're working on a tight time frame. We're working under pressures just like they are. And therefore, I'm not asking them to do things that I myself and CAIRNS as an organization is not willing to do.
Yeah, sure. It's not the situation where some organizations that are just behind on their end and then talk to an artist and say, hey, can you get this to me in a month because I wasn't prepared? It's like, no, we're in the same boat. Like, we're all in this together. And yeah. Along with that, how especially with this topic, with Takuwe, how do you organize the narrative structure to the show? Because that's one thing that's always been really impressive to me with all the shows, is that it's not just a collection of artworks. They are singular pieces that make sense totally unto themselves, but they all come together to tell this larger narrative. How do you approach that?
Well, so again, this is one of the things that we were going to challenge or reconceptualize from the very beginning. And most exhibits are done by curators who come up with an idea, and then they're the gatekeeper, and they push that idea through in every method they have at their disposal. And therefore, even if you have American Indian artists involved, they're following the philosophy of the curator, who is almost always a non-Indian. And what we're trying to do is say, well, let's decenter this curator as this core person and recenter on something that's important to communities, in these cases, communities. Well, these traditional narratives, people are fascinated by them. We want to know about them. We want to imagine them. And so then we started this idea. The first 3 exhibits in this series have been traditional narratives. But this one, Takuwe, there was no traditional narrative. And we didn't want a narrative or narratives of the killing, of the massacre itself. We wanted to stretch this out. So that's when we, decided we'll pick a time before the massacre was conceptualized and then bring it to today. Everything we're trying to bring to today. And then one other thing I wanted to say about that. For Takuwe, then what we use as a connective thread through a lot of it was the weather. And I would like to think of, South Dakotans, or I don't know if it's all people, but, I always think of rural people, which I am one, right? I grew up out here, and that we talk about the weather. And so this is this connective thread from December 16th to January 5th. Each day we have the weather statistics, so we have the sunrise and sunset, we have the moonrise and moonset, we have the illumination of the moon, so which phase the moon is, and the high temperature and the low temperature. All this just in one way be this connective thread, but otherwise personalize these days. And we give the day of the week, it's Monday or Sunday, this number. So it's not just December 29th, it's Monday, December 29th, or just trying to particularize this to get away from these ideas of just glossing over what we all know happened. We know what happened at Wounded Knee. We all think we do. And this way we're trying to provide content that people can interpret in their own ways.
Yeah, I just have to comment that the weather element when we were on the bus trip with you really hit home. There's so little that I knew before about the massacre, and I we could go on and on about our education system and what's left out, probably intentionally. But that was one of those things that it really puts you there as a South Dakotan when you hear about the weather and the extreme change from the one day to the next. And man, you just feel like I've experienced that. It puts you in that place. It makes it more real or something. So I just had to say that I really noted that weather comment when we talked with you earlier.
Yeah, that's cool. And through that weather, this is something I didn't know, right? I mean, I knew because we've all been told that that was it was a blizzard. It was cold that day, and it was that day, meaning the day of the massacre. It was cold and snow and everything, and the weather was 66 degrees. It was a high of 66 that day and sunny. And we would never have reached that knowledge if we hadn't done this weather And these are the things of, I mean, it's just kind of my experience as a researcher. And I think as anyone who does inquiry is that we just collect information and you compile information. And then at some point, maybe something illuminating is revealed. And you're like, wow. And that's, so then everyone says, well, what about those photographs? There's those famous photographs. And yes, those are famous photographs, but they were taken January 1st, 1891, the morning after the blizzard. And the blizzard came on New Year's Eve. And so it was when those people went back, Charles Eastman and others, when they went back to the killing field, they saved 11 people's lives that day. But with them were these two photographers, and that's where we get these first photographs. No idea that was the case when we started this exhibit. I had no idea that was out there.
You know, something you just said there, Craig, really ties me back into Dalton's approach as well. That kind of, that sense of inquiry and discovery, you know, that's kind of how Dalton was trying to approach the filming of this piece.
Yeah.
And I think there's unintentionally a very close parallel there of that idea of not imposing what you think is there, but having enough knowledge to start the process. Then you dig in a little bit and realize you know absolutely nothing, and you go back to the drawing board. And then, you know, so it's kind of this cyclical process of learning more, researching more, learning more, researching more, and kind of guiding that the whole way. I think that's really cool how the two really parallel each other. So Craig, one other question for you on just these types of shows, because as you mentioned, it is a novel approach to have this cross-disciplinary sort of decentered from the curator approach, but what kind of outcomes do you want to see from these shows? And I think of a couple of paths with that. One would just be, I know you have other curriculum, you know, you have some student curriculums, you have the chapbooks that come out of this, so there's some learning outcomes, but then, you know, do you hope that this inspires additional Native-led exhibits or Native-focused exhibits in a certain way? You know, what do you see the outcomes from these being?
Well, we have a whole bunch of hopeful outcomes. There's this systemic, I don't know, I would say there's a systemic racism in the museum world, the art world against American Indians, and definitely also a systemic inequity. And this is part of the reason why I'm out here and why we're doing these, is to push back against that. Whoa. And part of that, just hang on. So fundamentally, these exhibits have to be of very high quality. That cannot be set aside. So they have to be at the highest quality, and that involves these artists doing the best work they can. And it involves us, CAIRNS, as the curator and developer of these, doing the best job we can. So we, in a lot of ways, we want the first reaction of people to be, wow, that's an amazing exhibit. Then the second reaction I think we would like is, I didn't know that. And that comment can be about the content of the exhibit. It can be about the focus of the exhibit. It can be about the breadth of these artworks that are done by Lakota artists. It can be about the breadth of these poems by Lakota poets. It can be about the breadth of these songs by Lakota musicians. Or it can even be about the breadth and the diversity of those creatives themselves. So we're trying to push back on stereotypes and this idea of all of us Lakotas being the same, or even from the inside that, you know, real Lakotas do this way, or real Lakotas do, you know, paint a certain way, write in a certain way, or perform music in a certain way. And what we're wanting to do is promote this diversity in everything we do, constantly trying to illustrate there's multiple viewpoints here, and us Lakotas are as diverse as any other nation across the world.
Well, the art exhibits certainly showcase that. I mean, all of them that you've produced, they're amazing. I was thinking as you were talking about filming, Dalton, And Andrew and I have both been to Wing Springs, and it is an amazing place. It's a really special place, one of the most beautiful places really anywhere. I just wonder your thoughts on being out there and spending time exploring that geography, that space, that spirit that comes with being at Wing Springs.
Well, to be honest, I didn't actually want to film. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to just leave the equipment in the van and just stay. And I seriously, like, and I've told I don't know how many people since I've been there, because I've been there twice now, and both times I had to work. But it was it's beautiful, like you said, Jim. It's beautiful, and so to try to then say, well, how can we capture this? It'll never work, and that's one thing I've learned in the years of doing this, is that whenever I see beauty with my eyes, it will never translate on film that way. It has to be interpreted in a sense, and the film medium allows that to be interpreted. But just like an artist would look at a sunset and then paint that painting is still an interpretation of that sunset, because the actual sunset can only be really fully taken in if you're there. So it's finding ways of trying to film something that is, I have to make it look a certain way with the technique, as opposed to trying to capture it the way that it is, because a lot of times that will never work and it won't do it justice. So there's a balance there sometimes of trying to find those two things. But, Craig was a team player on that, which was good, because when we came out there the first time and he had to listen to me kind of go, oh, okay, so this is bigger than I thought. I need to regroup, and I need to go back home and come up with another concept. And he was very gracious. But yeah, every time the second time I came back out there, you were working on a new building.
Yep.
The building itself, the view is amazing, but the building itself, I think, is equally as beautiful. It really made a lasting impression on me.
Well,
But if you go, make sure you go when it's not raining too hard, right?
Yes. Well, the first time we went, I got stuck in the mud. And we were chasing, okay, so here it is. All right. So we were chasing a sunset. It was, the sun it had just rained and the sun was kind of popping out. We actually pulled over at a gas station and went under an awning because it was just pouring down. We just sat there and waited it out for about 20 minutes. And then we were chasing the sun. The sun looked good. And we're like, over there. And I turned down this dirt road. And anybody that's been out in that part of South Dakota knows that the mud is like clay. And when it rains, it's like oil. It's just an oil slick. And so I'm driving down this dirt road like an idiot, not really, just looking at the sun like, yeah. And then suddenly we start, doing this number, and flew off into the ditch, and then didn't quite have enough power to get it back up on the road and got stuck. And we were out there for maybe 2 hours, pulling out everything in the truck that resembled a shovel, trying to dig ourselves out. We just, of course, you keep burying it further and further. And I called Craig and I said, hey, I don't think we're going to be able to make it back. And I didn't want to chance it by driving back out to where he was, because it's kind of out, I drive through more mud and more, I just was very, Craig was gracious. There was a gentleman out there by the name of Kyle that eventually drove by. And I think it was Kyle's mother that drove by and said, we live right over here. I'll go get my son to help you. And he came out and had a chain and pulled us out. So every time we go out, we're always we always make a joke now about if we're gonna get stuck, where's Kyle? Right. We need Kyle. Right. So thank you, Kyle of Martin.
Great story. It's such a great story.
Well, I think, one other thing I wanted to just, bring up is some of the other activities of CAIRNS. And, one thing, Dr. Howe, you do are these bus workshops, and Art South Dakota was lucky enough to collaborate about a year ago on one of these with a number of artists, art supporters, and arts organizations. But kind of tying that in, first of all, just what are some of the other activities of CAIRNS for the audience that might know you primarily through the exhibits, but tying it back into our previous conversation, one thing that you brought up so much on this workshop and why the traveling workshop was so key was the rootedness in the land and being physically at these places. And I think that what Dalton was mentioning was kind of him feeling that power of you can try to translate, but it's always a translation. There's always an intermediary, and if you can physically be there, it's like the weather thing, where now you see it's this hill, it's this place, and on this day it was sunny, and this day it was snowy, and it was a Monday, and it brings you really there. So maybe the first question might just be, how did you kind of come to that approach of really trying to root it in the physical spaces, and then what are kind of some of the other work of CAIRNS that you do?
So this idea of rooting in place is trying to tie to this philosophy that the land is powerful, that the land is a being. Whether or not we believe that is irrelevant. It's kind of like gathering that weather information that we just have to get details and then see if something arises. So by getting to these places, so I guess the way to say that would be, we can do the very same course in a classroom, or we could do it through Zoom. We could do it in any way. We can convey that content through any medium. But if we want to see if the land affects us, we have to go there. There is no substitute. So we're not saying by going to these that you will be affected by it or you will feel something, but only by going, can that happen? Is that possible? And so that's, with that way of thinking, that's how we develop these traveling seminars or classrooms on wheel that these classrooms on wheels that we were trying to get people out to these places. And again, focusing within the territorial domain extent of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. So particularizing this to a certain landscape we're interested in, and then to these places, from the emergence of Lakotas onto this world to, some contemporary event right now in 2018 or 2020, so people can see, oh, this is where it is. This is what it looks like here. And then they can start to interpret it and feel it in their own way.
I think having been on that, another example, having been on that traveling workshop, was when we went to the red shirt table in the Badlands, and having Michael Tubols there, who a fantastic artist, visual artist and musician, and was involved in Takuwe, and but having him there talking about his family that was there, and and again, it's that personalizing it, how somehow, I think oftentimes with especially terrifying experiences, it is easier for us to confront them if we step back and look at it as this large scale thing. Oh, this was terrible, it happened. But when you see this person was in this space on this day, and then when we're able to physically be there, it really it changes the experience. And I think that follows through to how you do your gallery exhibits. How you mentioned you want there to be that you want to see, you want to hear, you want to read. It's kind of that involving as many of your senses in that education process as possible, while still focusing on education. It's not only sensuous. It seems like there's always some sort of a takeaway. Is that kind of part of the approach?
Yeah, yep. We definitely want this kind of to be as immersive as we can, whether it's on this traveling seminars or in this exhibit. And we just think this, from experience and from research, we know that things are more things will be remembered better the more sensory avenues or the more sensory receptors are activated, or I don't know how, if we taste something, see it, smell it, feel it, that's 4 different ways we're going to remember that thing. And so with these exhibits or whatever we do, we try to get these multiple senses involved in them. And towards that end, we have lots of ideas for exhibits, and maybe a majority of them have never been implemented yet. We just run out of time if we have 4 months, or we don't have the financial resources, so we can't build it or buy it, or so there's a lot of issues that limit our capability to be as immersive as we can.
So that leads me, as you talk about ideas for future exhibits, I was thinking about both of you guys, Dalton and Craig. What are you working on? What's next? What's on the table right now that you're developing?
I just from a personal standpoint, working on a feature film. Always looking to tell stories. I don't do as much commercial work as I used to do by choice, but to get to do things like this is, being an artist myself, it took me a long time before I'd call myself an artist. I was a filmmaker. I felt like I lied to people. I felt like I made lies, and at some level I would manipulate you with sound or music or things like that. But it really is, it's an artistic medium, and I've learned to accept that I'm an artist. I have an artist temperament. I get moody like an artist does, and all of that stuff. But to move forward with any opportunity, to looking for on the horizon for these opportunities to be able to do projects like this is always something that I'm constantly reaching for. And, I've got, obviously with the nature of the landscape with what's going on in the world right now, I was supposed to be shooting a feature film back in June, and that obviously got pushed and then kept getting pushed. And so now it's the spring, hopefully. So the spring, I'm going to be going back down to Arkansas and working on another feature film. But always love working with artists. Most of the stories and narrative projects I work on involve artists in some way. And the characters a lot of times are artists. I find them interesting, whether they're writers or whether they're painters or musicians. Artists are, I think, the most fascinating and necessary people on the planet, frankly.
Yeah, I like that. And I really think that this Takuwe film that Dalton created is, it's similar to the process these artists go through. We give them, the artists, we give them, a broad overview or a certain section of a narrative and ask them to create something. In this case, we didn't give Dalton anything, but Dalton came and was challenged with this task of creating these movies. And based on that, created this amazing film. Similarly, these artists, when tasked with doing something, they create these amazing pieces. And as a curator, you have to let that go. You have to trust that they're going to do these good works, and we can't dictate that. It's only through maturity that I got to this point, because I would rather tell them, here's what I want you to do. And I've learned that if you want to be surprised, and if you want the best from these talented individuals, you have to give them the space and the challenge to do their best, and they do it every time. It's scary in a way, especially on that first exhibit, when you just say, here's what I'd like you to do and or work on, and then you wait, maybe a month or 2 months, and they bring their artwork into the gallery, or they say, here's a link to the video, and you're like, wow, never could have imagined that myself. So this kind of loops back to this idea of how it is to work with artists. But I also just want to reiterate that this is a work of art that belongs with that exhibit. This meaning the Dalton era film. That belongs with that exhibit. It's of the same vein. It's out of the same content. So I really appreciate that. As for what we're doing or what CAIRNS is, one of the things that we're in the process of doing is the next exhibit. So after Takuwe, we did an exhibit called Articles of a Treaty. And this was a continuation of using historical events and looking at them through art exhibits. So we looked at the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty through Articles of a Treaty, and there the connective narrative are the articles of the treaty. A lot of people talk about the treaty, but very few people ever read the treaty. And it's 17 articles, so we have 17 sections to that exhibit. And again, for each section, we have 2 visual artists and a poet and a musician. So looking at that historical document, and then right now we're working on the next exhibit, and it's called The Gift. And it's this, we return to a traditional narrative. And this is the one where the ancestors of Lakotas who live in the underworld, they send a messenger with the sacred pipe to the Lakota people, and she delivers that sacred pipe. And so it's called The Gift, and it's that narrative of her bringing that pipe and giving it to Lakota people.
That's really exciting. Is there kind of a rough estimate of when you're hoping to have that show ready to be public?
Yes, it was supposed to open in May, at the end of May of this year, and it got pushed back a year. So it'll be May of 2021. The Gift will open at Akta Lakota Museum in Chamberlain.
And do you have any of the previous shows currently exhibiting anywhere?
Yes, let's see, Articles of a Treaty it's being put up as we speak today. It's being put up at the Heritage Center at Red Cloud Indian School. It just came from South Dakota Art Museum. And Takuwe, Monday was its last day at the Brinton Museum in Bighorn, Wyoming. And that exhibit now the artworks will be returned to the artists. And so that exhibit will be dispersed. It'll only exist digitally from here forth. And so again, this video is a wonderful document of the exhibit.
No, it means a lot to me to hear you say that. I mean, your approval is who I would seek more than anyone's. And I think what I learned through this whole thing was, like you said, you mentioned before about people saying, "I didn't know that." There was so much of that. I didn't know that. And I'm a real history kind of nerd myself. And so to be able to learn this history, and then yet at the same time with this artwork, and just the power that artwork has of being able to go, no, we can literally teach history and learn history, things we didn't know through this art exhibit. And the Lakota story obviously isn't over. You guys are using this artwork to tell all of these stories. And right now, these artists are telling their story by telling their ancestors' story. And it's just this continuation. I love the idea. A lot of people have given me a hard time before in some of my films where it's like, well, it's too ambiguous, you know, and or I've had people come to me and go, man, I thought about the end of that movie for 3 weeks. And I'm like, perfect. You know, I don't want to end it and tie it all up in this pretty bow and send you home with nothing to think about. Right. And so that's what moves me so much about what it is that you're doing with these exhibits is you want people to think about it, and you want people to think about it for a long, long time and ask more questions.
Yeah.
I think that's what moves forward.
You could have cut out that old guy at the beginning of the film, though. That would have helped out. But other than that, it was really good.
I wish we could have had more of that. Well, you know, because we, as you know, we shot a whole interview and all these questions. And that was whenever I thought, well, maybe we'll go this direction with it. Maybe we'll go that way. So for nothing else, it's good to have it, you know, for posterity's sake.
It's really well done.
Well, thank you so much for joining for this conversation. You know, it was great to have both Dr. Howe with CAIRNS and Dalton Coffey, the filmmaker, with us. this was a particularly impactful piece. The gallery exhibit itself was, and I think this film was a good representation of it. And I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation for everyone to view later, to kind of engender some more topics for people to think of on their own. And I hope that this dialogue continues with people. So thank you again, everyone, for being here, and really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, guys, I just want to tell you, Art South Dakota is so thankful to have you both as partners. It's just, we couldn't do this work without you. So thank you so much for your time today. Oh, great.
I was hoping it would last.
It almost made it through. But no, it was a great conversation. I sure enjoyed talking with you guys. Thank you.
Oh, you
you bet. Thank you
so much.
Thanks so much.